Sometime today your hands touched grease. Maybe it was butter, or the outside of a takeaway box, or the handle of a pan. And I want you to try something because it tells you almost everything. Put those greasy hands under the tap and rub them hard with nothing but water. What happens? Almost nothing. The water runs straight off. Your fingers still feel slick and coated, and the grease sits there, completely untouched, as if the water never even arrived. Now add one small drop of soap, rub for a few seconds, and the grease is simply gone. And here is the thing that surprised me the most. Soap is not stronger than water. Soap does not attack that grease at all. Soap just knows one trick that water has never been able to do on its own. I'm Mr. Why, and let's start with what you probably believe, because once you see why it is wrong, the real answer is far more charming. Most of us picture soap as a kind of tiny weapon. We imagine it kills the dirt, or burns it, or melts it, or dissolves it away. Soap is the scrubber, the destroyer, the thing that goes in and gets rid of the mess. But here is the puzzle sitting underneath that. Water is usually called the universal solvent. It dissolves salt. It dissolves sugar. It carries away sweat, dust, mud, juice, ink, almost anything you can name. Water is very, very good at picking things up and taking them away. So why, out of all the messes in the world, does water fail so completely and so embarrassingly against a little bit of grease on your fingers? And here is the twist that turns the whole thing inside out. Soap is not a weapon. Soap does not destroy the grease, and it does not dissolve the grease. Soap is a negotiator. It is a translator, standing patiently in the middle of two substances that flatly refuse to speak to each other, holding one hand of each until they can finally do business. The grease never gets destroyed. It just gets escorted out. Let me show you how, and to do that I first have to show you why water and grease hate each other so much in the first place. So picture the water in your hands, not as a smooth liquid, but as an enormous crowd of tiny molecules. And the important thing about water molecules is that they are extremely sociable, but only with each other. Each one has a slightly positive end and a slightly negative end, and so they cling to one another, holding on tightly all through the crowd. They much prefer their own company. Grease and oil are built differently. They do not have those slightly positive and slightly negative ends, so they cannot join in. They cannot hold hands with the water at all. And so what happens is not that the water pushes the grease away out of dislike. Exactly. What happens is that the water molecules would rather hold on to each other than let a stranger in between them. So they close ranks. They tighten up, and the grease gets squeezed out, left behind, sitting stubbornly on your skin. That is why oil and water separate in a jar, and it is why the water in your hands ran straight off. It was never fighting the grease. It was simply ignoring it and holding on to itself instead. So now, into that standoff, we drop the soap. And a soap molecule is one of the strangest little shapes in your whole house because it is two-faced, literally two-faced. Picture it as a tiny tadpole. At one end there is a round head, and that head loves water. It is happy in the water, comfortable, right at home in the crowd. And at the other end there is a long, thin tail, and that tail cannot stand water. It hates being surrounded by it. But that tail is perfectly happy in one place, and one place only: grease, oil, fat. The tail feels at home in exactly the stuff the water refuses to touch. Chemists have a word for a molecule with two opposite halves like this. They call it an amphiphile, which just means it loves both sides. And that is the whole secret of soap. It is a molecule that speaks both languages at once. So watch what happens when you rub soap and water into greasy hands. Millions of these little two-faced tadpoles go swarming into the water. And every single one of them is uncomfortable because every tail is stuck in water, and tails hate water. So the tails start looking for somewhere to hide. And there, all over your skin, are little blobs of grease. Perfect. The tails dive straight in, burrowing into the grease, like a crowd of tiny swimmers escaping the rain. And once the tails are buried in the grease, all the heads are left sticking out, facing the water, perfectly happy where they are. And now look at what that has quietly built. The blob of grease ends up completely surrounded, wrapped in a coat of soap molecules, with all the greasy tails pointing inward and all the water-loving heads pointing outward. It becomes a tiny ball, with grease trapped in the middle and a friendly, water-loving surface on the outside. That little parcel has a name. It is called a Micelle, and this is the entire trick, so let me say it plainly. The water never has to accept the grease. The water only has to accept the wrapping. From the outside, that ball simply looks like something water can hold on to, and so the water picks it up, no argument, and carries the whole parcel down the drain with the grease still sealed inside it, never once having touched it. And soap has a second, quieter trick that most people never hear about. You know how water beads up into little round droplets on a waxy surface instead of spreading out flat? That is because those clingy water molecules pull together so tightly at the surface that they form a kind of invisible skin. It is why a droplet holds its shape, and it is why plain water sometimes seems to roll over a thing rather than soak into it. Soap breaks that skin. The two-faced molecules push in between the water molecules and stop them clinging so hard to each other. And a softer, looser water is a water that finally spreads. It flattens out, it creeps into the tiny creases in your skin, it soaks deep into the fibers of a cloth instead of rolling over the top. So soap does not just carry the mess away. It also lets the water actually reach it in the first place. And now the part that genuinely amazed me, and it is where soap stops being polite and gets brutal. Some viruses, including the flu and the coronaviruses, are not naked little things. They are wrapped in a coat, and that coat is made of fat. Scientists call it a lipid envelope, but it really is just a thin skin of grease holding the whole virus together. And you already know what soap does when it meets grease. In 2020, Paul Thordarson, a professor of chemistry at the University of New South Wales, explained this in a way that traveled all around the world. Those long soap tails, hunting for somewhere to hide from the water, dive straight into the fatty coat of the virus. They wedge themselves in, they prise it apart, and the coat comes undone. And when the coat comes undone, the virus does not survive as a working thing. It falls to pieces, which means that against those viruses, an ordinary bar of soap can be more thorough than a splash of disinfectant, because it is not trying to poison anything. It is simply taking the thing apart at the seams and then rinsing the pieces away. And that finally explains something you have been told your whole life without ever being told why. 20 seconds. Why 20 seconds of soap when a quick rinse feels like it should be enough? Because everything I have just described takes time. The tails have to find the grease, they have to wriggle in, they have to surround it and close the parcel. The fatty coats have to be prized apart, and then the water has to lift all those little balls away and take them down the drain. A 2-second rinse interrupts the negotiation halfway through. You have started the conversation and walked out of the room. 20 seconds is not superstition. It is roughly how long it takes the translator to finish talking. So here is the surprising part, the thing that quietly rearranges the whole bathroom sink. Soap does not kill your mess, and soap does not dissolve your mess. Soap changes what your mess looks like from the outside. It takes something water refuses to touch, wraps it in something water is delighted to touch, and lets the water do the rest. It does not win the argument between water and grease. It stands in the middle and translates until the argument stops mattering. So here is what I want you to carry with you. The next time you wash your hands, you are not scraping anything off. You are building thousands upon thousands of microscopic parcels, each one a scrap of grease wrapped in a coat that water knows how to hold, and then simply letting them float away. And that slippery, coated feeling you get when you wash a greasy pan with hot water and no soap, that faint film left on your fingers, is not the water failing to work hard enough. It is the water refusing to speak to the grease, and there being nobody there to translate. So the next time you rub a little soap between your hands and the slick just vanishes, you can smile because now you know the secret. Nothing was destroyed. Something was simply wrapped up and shown to the door. Now I would love to know, down in the comments, did you always think soap killed the dirt or melted the grease, like I used to? And be honest, do you actually count the 20 seconds, or are you a 3-second rinser? And if you enjoy having the most ordinary things around you quietly taken apart until they finally make sense, subscribe and stay for more simple lessons from Mr. Why?